Rain lashed against the grimy windows of my office, mirroring the storm brewing inside me. A crumpled newspaper lay on my desk, the headline screaming, "Jack's back and his grown UP." Beneath it, a grainy photo of a gaunt, bearded man, his eyes haunted. Jack. The Jack from the Beanstalk fairy tale. Or so everyone thought. 20 years ago, the world was captivated by the story. A boy, magic beans, a giant, riches. Then, Jack vanished. Poof. Gone. Now, he was back, claiming the giant was real, that he'd escaped, and was coming for revenge. The police dismissed him as a lunatic, but something in his desperate eyes, the raw terror clinging to him, made me, Detective Inspector Leo Maxwell. Take notice, my phone rang, shattering the silence. It was Mrs. Higgins, the old woman who'd supposedly traded Jack the beans. Her voice trembled. "He's here, Inspector." "He's at my door." I grabbed my coat, my gut twisting. This was insane. Giants? Magic beans? But Mrs. Higgins' terror was palpable. I raced to her address, a dilapidated cottage on the edge of town. Police cars already surrounded it, blue lights flashing against the stormy night. Inside, the scene was chaotic. Mrs. Higgins was huddled in a corner, sobbing. A young constable pointed a shaking hand at the ceiling. "Look," I followed his gaze. A massive hole ripped through the roof, jagged edges splintered. It looked like something huge had torn through it. "He took her," Mrs. Higgins wailed. "He took her up there, up." My heart pounded. This was beyond anything I'd ever dealt with. I ordered a helicopter, ignoring the snickers from the other officers. They thought I was mad, chasing a fairy tale. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something truly monstrous was happening. The helicopter hovered above the cottage, the searchlight cutting through the darkness. We followed the trail of destruction, broken branches, crushed fences leading towards a vast, abandoned industrial complex on the outskirts of the city. It was a maze of rusting metal and towering silos, a perfect hiding place for whatever we were hunting. The helicopter landed near the main entrance. We moved in cautiously, guns drawn. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the wind whistling through the empty buildings. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of damp metal and something else. Something acrid, almost earthy. We found him in the largest silo. Not the giant. Jack. He was standing amidst a pile of gold. Mountains of it. More than anyone could ever spend. He was no longer the haunted man from the newspaper photo. He was triumphant. "Welcome, Inspector," he said, a chilling smile spreading across his face. "I see you found my little nest egg. Where's Mrs. Higgins?" I demanded. Jack chuckled. "Don't worry, she's fine. Just resting." He gestured to a dark corner of the silo. I cautiously approached. And then I saw it. Not a giant, but a massive, intricately crafted machine. Gears whirred, pistons pumped. It was a beanstalk. A mechanical beanstalk, reaching up through a hole in the silo roof, disappearing into the storm clouds. "You see, Inspector," Jack explained, his voice dripping with arrogance. The story was true. But it wasn't about magic. It was about technology. My grandfather, the original Jack, was a brilliant inventor. He built this machine, a device capable of extracting rare minerals from the upper atmosphere. He called them sky beans. The giant wasn't a monster, he was a rival inventor, trying to steal his technology. And Mrs. Higgins? I asked, my mind reeling. She's my partner, Jack said. She helped me rebuild the machine. The story was just a cover, a way to keep people away from my grandfather's secret. The police never suspected a fairy tale, he laughed, a cold, hollow sound. Now, Inspector, I'm going to be very rich. And you? You going to keep my secret? Or? You'll disappear, just like my grandfather's rivals. He held up a small, metallic device. This, he said, is a miniature version of the Beanstalk. Powerful enough to rearrange molecules. Think of the possibilities. My blood ran cold. He wasn't just a thief. He was a sociopath. And he had a weapon that could rewrite reality. Then, a voice echoed from the silo entrance. Jack! What have you done? It was Mrs. Higgins. She wasn't huddled and sobbing. She was standing tall, her eyes blazing with fury. You promised we'd share the wealth, she screamed. You said we'd be partners, Jack sneered. Partners? You're just an old woman. You served your purpose, he raised the device. But before he could activate it, Mrs. Higgins lunged forward, grabbing a wrench from the nearby workbench. She swung it with surprising force, hitting Jack squarely in the head. He crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Mrs. Higgins turned to me, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. He was going to betray me, she said, her voice trembling. He was going to take everything. Then, she pointed to the machine. That, she said, needs to be destroyed. It's too dangerous, and that was the twist. The real villain wasn't the giant. It wasn't even Jack. It was the technology itself. And the true hero? The old woman everyone dismissed as a harmless eccentric. She'd been playing Jack all along, waiting for her moment to strike. The fairy tale wasn't about a giant and magic beans. It was about greed, betrayal, and the unexpected strength of an old woman who knew how to use a wrench.